The best thing a human being can do is to help others know more. Charlie, a man born in the 20th century, standing outside all the halo of technology, hiding in the shadow of dry investment stories, is nevertheless regarded by millions of people in the 21st century as a sage. How can we explain that? Charlie Munger never wrote a book of his own. He didn't create a doctrine, nor did he invent any algorithm, but through his concise, ruthlessly precise way of thinking, he quietly restructured the way people reason, make decisions, and behave in life. In an era that thirsts for brilliance, he chose to stand still, but in the right place. The question is not how many times he was right, but why he was wrong less often than others, and wrong in an organized way. This book is not a biography, nor is it an investment Bible. It is a cognitive framework where every speech, every answer, every excerpt is a brick building something far more important than profit, a long-lasting operating system for living in an increasingly chaotic world. If you think you are about to read a get-rich-quick book, stop right now. But if you are ready to be challenged, to have your comfortable illusions worn away, and to confront your own intellectual laziness, then keep turning the pages. Not because Charlie Munger will give you the answers, but because he will teach you to ask the right questions. We encourage listeners to buy and read the original book to fully experience its content. Now, let's begin summarizing this book with me. Chapter 1. Portrait of Charlie Munger. There are people whose lives resemble a complex jigsaw puzzle. Each seemingly meaningless piece turns out to be decisive for the whole picture. Charlie Munger is such a person. If Warren Buffett is the statue representing modern American investment intellect, then Charlie is the sculptor standing quietly behind, indispensable. To understand how he could achieve that, we must go back to the very beginning, the story of a child born on the first day of 1924 in the heart of America. Charlie was born in Omaha, Nebraska, the same land that gave us Walt Disney, Gerald Ford, Harry Truman, and of course Warren Buffett. There seems to be something in the Midwestern wind that turns the children of this region into early symbols of perseverance, independence, and dry yet profound humor. Among them, Charlie was a strange case, at once the sharpest observer of his era and the one who refused all the spotlight that era offered. As a boy, Charlie worked at Buffett & Son grocery store, owned by Warren's grandfather, Ernest Buffett, an extremely strict man. Charlie and the other children worked 12 hours a day, no breaks, no meals. At the end of the day they even had to pay 2 cents into the new Social Security fund, accompanied by a lecture on the evils of socialism. The story sounds like an amusing anecdote. But it was precisely from those tough years that both Charlie and Warren learned their first lessons about labor, discipline, and the real value of money. Charlie's childhood was far from glamorous. He didn't come from a tycoon family but from a middle-class intellectual lineage where books and critical thinking were valued above everything else. Charlie was obsessed with reading, especially biographies. That's why he early on became fascinated with Benjamin Franklin, a symbol of multidisciplinary intellect, principled living, and lifelong self-education. His family gave books as Christmas gifts, and Charlie would finish them in a single night. No iPad, no internet, just a lamp and endless curiosity. As a teenager, Charlie frequently visited Dr. Ada Davis, his father's close friend, to borrow medical journals. At 14, the boy wasn't just captivated by surgery, he was also drawn to medical statistics. The combination of scientific thinking and data analysis, qualities of a modern investor, already appeared in Charlie long before he knew Wall Street existed. Here's a small, unforgettable anecdote. Charlie once raised 35 hamsters in his basement, then traded and sold them to other kids, always cleverly choosing bigger, more unusually colored ones in return. The future investment genius started with a smelly hamster farm, until his mother issued an ultimatum: get rid of them or move out. Beyond childhood, Charlie continued to prove he wasn't the type to follow molds. At school he frequently challenged teachers, not with rebellion, but with superior knowledge and questions so sharp they embarrassed them. It's no surprise he was soon seen as having an excessively sharp personality. Yet that sharpness never came with arrogance. Charlie was always calm, profound, and especially never spoke more than necessary. After high school, he attended the University of Michigan. But midway through, he joined the U.S. Army during World War II. Perhaps like every organization that ever encountered him, the army soon realized he wasn't suited for mechanical obedience. He was sent to study meteorology at Caltech, where his analytical and logical intelligence developed more strongly than ever. It was at Caltech that he met his first wife, a talented, strong-willed young woman equal to anyone. They married, had 3 children, then divorced. That incomplete family life left many scars, but it also made Charlie more mature, quieter, and more seasoned in facing loss. One of the deepest losses was the death of his son Teddy, a shock that changed him permanently. When asked how he overcame it, Charlie simply said, "You have to keep going. No one can help you. There's no shortcut for pain." That was the first chapter of the sharp-edged, cold, and brutally honest journey of Charles Munger, the man Warren Buffett called the worthiest intellectual opponent I've ever known. And this is only the prelude. After the war, Charlie left the military with a decision unlike anyone else. Instead of returning to Michigan to finish his undergraduate degree, he jumped straight into Harvard Law School without a bachelor's degree. In his application letter to the admissions board, he explained with pure reasoning, no pleading, no excuses, and Harvard accepted him. He not only graduated but ranked in the top 10 of his class. He didn't stand out for charisma or dramatic debates. He stood out for razor-sharp reasoning, fearless counter-argument, and always going straight to the heart of the matter. One professor said, "Charlie never talks much, but when he does, everyone else falls silent." After graduation, Charlie began his career as a lawyer at the firm of Munger, Tolley's and Olson, then known as R. and Garrett. Lawyer Munger quickly became famous in the legal world for 2 reasons: his exceptionally sharp writing and argumentation skills, and his uncompromising temperament. He didn't hesitate to reject cases he considered foolish, and even complained about colleagues if they worked dishonestly or carelessly. For Charlie, the law was not a place for loopholes, it was a place to protect principles. But after some time practicing law, he realized he was on the wrong path. Despite his success, he felt bored. The legal field limited the way he could think, it forced him into a box, and he hated boxes. "Don't sell the best years of your life just to live the rest of it," he once said. With that spirit, Charlie decided to switch to investing. In 1962 came the turning point. He founded his own investment company. At that time, Warren Buffett had already built Buffett Partnership and was emerging as a phenomenon in Omaha. Although they had known each other since childhood, it was only that year that the two sat down for lunch again. The meeting lasted for hours. Buffett later recalled, "We just talked, no small talk, no warm-up. We started arguing as if we had been debating each other for 20 years. That was the beginning of a friendship, and later a partnership, considered the most successful in modern financial history." Interestingly, Charlie and Warren had very different investment styles at first. Early Warren was a pure value hunter, loving to hunt undervalued stocks a la Benjamin Graham. Charlie was not. He didn't like that style. "I don't want to own terrible companies just because they're cheap," he said. "I want to own wonderful companies and pay a fair price for them." It was Charlie who led Warren out from under Graham's shadow and toward the style of buying wonderful companies at fair prices, paving the way for legendary investments like Coca-Cola, See's Candies, Geico. Charlie never believed in imitating anyone, not even Buffett. He built his own thinking system, later called the latticework of mental models. That was what made him different. While most investors were obsessed with charts, algorithms, and metrics, Charlie read history, biology, psychology, physics, literature. He believed the most important insights don't lie in finance, they lie in how humans behave and how the world really works. From there, he spent years building a mental operating system that wove dozens of models from different disciplines. Every investment decision, every company analysis, every ethical critique was the product of the intersection between behavioral psychology, probability and statistics, systems theory, and life experience. And he never kept those tools to himself. He passed them on through speeches, notes, interviews, even casual stories. Once, during a talk with Stanford students, someone asked, "How can I become successful like you?" Charlie replied, "Learn to love learning. If not, you've already shot yourself in the foot." Then he paused, smiled, and added, and never be overconfident, because then you've already lost your mind. Charlie didn't talk much. But every sentence was like a straight hook to the listener's complacency. He hated half measures, hated lazy thinking, and hated most of all stupidity disguised in fancy language. In one conference, when someone presented a long, convoluted slide, he just nodded and said, "This should be rewritten with a hammer." Charlie was not only an investor, he was a thinker about life. The way he saw the world always made people stop and ask why they had never thought that way before. He once said, "There is something worse than ignorance, ignorance plus passion." That wasn't sarcasm. It was a warning: if you enter life with enthusiasm but without proper thinking, you don't just harm yourself, you drag others into the tragedy you create. That was the kind of ethics Charlie pursued, the ethics of clear thinking. He didn't believe in compromising with wrongness. Once, at a shareholder meeting, an analyst presented a 30-page financial model to justify a sky-high valuation for a perpetually loss-making company. Charlie looked bored, frowned, and said, "When you need 30 pages to prove you're not stupid, then you are." Beneath the cold, sometimes harsh exterior was an extremely warm and humane person. Those close to him describe him as a gentle father, a devoted grandfather, a considerate husband, and a friend you could call at 2 a.m. without being scolded. One of Charlie's greatest life philosophies: become lovable, and don't demand that others love you first. It sounds simple, but looked at deeply, it is a call to live nobly, a quality that has gradually disappeared in today's ruthless competitive world. When asked how to become like him, Charlie didn't talk about degrees. He talked about temperament. You can be smart, but if you lack humility, lack discipline, and are easily swayed by emotion, you will forever remain on the sidelines of life's big stage. For him, success is not the product of genius, it is the result of decades of persistent mental discipline. One principle Charlie applied to every aspect of life: inversion thinking. Always ask, what if I did the opposite? This is the spirit of inversion thinking, one of his favorite mental models in investing. Instead of asking what will make this deal succeed, he asked, what could make it fail catastrophically? When teaching his children, instead of how do we make them successful, he thought, how do we make sure they don't become miserable, foolish, or morally low people? That way of thinking helped him avoid countless mistakes. Charlie didn't try to do many things right, he just tried not to do catastrophically wrong things. And he believed, if you can simply avoid being stupid, you're already better than most of the world. Once, when a young student asked him to summarize his life philosophy in one sentence, he thought for a moment and said, learn all your life, and remember that most people are idiots in some areas, including you. So never be too certain about what's in your head. That's what made Charlie different: intelligent but never arrogant, strong but never showy, successful but never boastful. In a world swept up by flashy fame and social media likes, he was like a rock lying still in the middle of the river, solid, silent, unchanging. And that's why he became a role model for so many people, from Silicon Valley CEOs to fresh graduates, not because he was rich, but because he lived as if writing a manual on how to become a decent, clear-thinking person who lives a life without regret. Even into his 80s, Charlie still worked every day. He read at least 5 hours, took notes, observed markets, and talked with young people. He didn't seek immortality, but clearly he lived in a way that ensured his name would remain long after he left this world. To understand Charlie Munger, you cannot just look at net worth numbers or successful deals. You must look at the values he would never trade away, no matter the price. One of them was absolute integrity. Charlie once said, if you cannot look in the mirror and face the real you, then you have lived a failed life, no matter how much money you have. He placed enormous value on integrity in business and personal life. It wasn't just a moral choice, it was a strategic one. Because if you don't live honestly, you have to keep lying to maintain the illusion, and no one is smart enough to do that forever. Charlie always warned young people about fallacies in thinking. He hated sophistry, especially what he called label thinking, when you slap a label on a person or idea and refuse to dig deeper just because it doesn't fit your familiar pattern. We live in a world where everyone competes to shout their beliefs the loudest, but very few dare to whisper questions to themselves. At a USC conference he said, "That attitude makes me not the most likable person to everyone. I can make you feel small because of my almost ruthless precision in argument, but I never use intellect to dominate anyone. I use it to illuminate." For him, a good conversation is not a place to win, it's a place to discover what is true together. When asked how to get a mind like his, Charlie didn't hesitate: read voraciously, widely, and deeply, and never believe you know enough. Every day. He spent most of his time reading books, financial reports, biographies, science, philosophy, even fields with no immediate purpose. Beyond expanding the borders of his mind, that lifelong learning philosophy kept him ahead of his time. In an era when people are swept into short-term news, fluctuating charts, and herd investment trends, he maintained an independent, clear mind because he didn't learn to win today's game. He learned to deeply understand how the world works, and from there, choose to stand firm on his own ground. That's why he could make decisions others thought strange, but later proved correct. Like investing in Cease Candies, a seemingly ordinary candy company that turned out to be a gem. Buffett admitted, "Without Charlie, I would never have learned to truly evaluate a brand." Cease changed Buffett's entire investment style, from pure valuation to seeking businesses with durable competitive advantages. Another thing that made Charlie special, he was never afraid to change when he was wrong. When reality changed, he adjusted his beliefs: no stubbornness, no conservatism, no self-deception. He once said, "You must have the courage to destroy your own favorite ideas when they are no longer correct." That is the rarest form of courage, the courage to let go of ego. At age 90, Charlie still spoke in the same unchanged language: direct, clear, no frills. He didn't try to be media-friendly, didn't say sweet words, and didn't care about saving face if it obstructed truth. But behind that gruff appearance was a deeply compassionate intellect, always encouraging people to live right, think deeply, and behave well. The portrait of Charlie Munger, if painted in words, cannot be complete with just the color of intellect. It needs the deep tones of discipline, the dark shades of realism, and the quiet fire of faith in humanity. A man who didn't need to be a guru but left influence like a sage, a man who never wrote an autobiography, yet every speech of his became a bedside book for millions. And when looking back at Charlie's life, we don't just see a great investor. We see a person who lived with a system, with principles, with depth, and who never sold his intellect cheaply for shallow things. That journey began with a skinny boy selling candy in Omaha and became a quiet epic, a great lesson, not about investing, but about how to live a life worth living. Chapter 2. Recollections from Charlie's Children. Imagine being a child raised in a home where moral stories weren't told like fairy tales, but like urgent battlefield reports. Where right and wrong weren't distinguished merely by words of instruction, but by consequences. That was the childhood Charlie Munger's children experienced. And what they recount in this chapter is not just the portrait of a father, but a lifelong classroom where the teacher never stood on a podium. One of his sons, Ted, recalls a family ski trip in Sun Valley. On the way to the airport, Charlie suddenly stopped to fill up the gas tank even though it was still half full. Surprised, the son asked why. Charlie's answer came like a moral manifesto. When you borrow someone's car, you always return it with a full tank. Much later, Ted learned it was Rick Guerin's car, one of Charlie's close friends who certainly wouldn't have minded if the tank was a little low. But the point wasn't whether the owner cared, it was whether the borrower knew how to behave decently. In that small moment, Charlie taught his child not just manners, but how to preserve long-term friendship. Another daughter, Wendy, remembers that Charlie had two favorite types of bedtime stories: Titans, stories where the protagonist chooses the right path, and the downward spirals, stories where one small moral lapse snowballs into the complete collapse of a life. She laughs remembering how he especially loved the destruction stories, so much so that the dinner table would groan and giggle at the same time. But each tale planted in the children's minds a standard, a boundary, a very real vision: if you are not honest, if you do not act with integrity, the price will be extremely high. Wendy tells a specific story: an employee at one of Charlie's companies once caused a loss of hundreds of thousands of dollars due to a mistake. The moment it was discovered, the person immediately confessed to the chairman and to Charlie. Instead of firing him, Charlie kept him because he had done the right thing by owning up immediately. If he had tried to hide it even a little, he would have been gone on the spot. For Charlie, mistakes can be forgiven, dishonesty cannot. Another stepson, Barry Bostwick, recalls summers in Minnesota at the family cabin. Small incidents became lifelong lessons. One windy, rainy morning, Barry drove into town to pick up the housekeeper and forgot to buy Charlie's newspaper. Charlie's response was calm and firm: "Go back and get it, and don't ever forget again." No yelling, no anger, just a short, clear, decisive command that carried an entire philosophy: do it right the first time. Another story, a child dropped the house keys to the bottom of the lake, a childish slip, but no indulgence followed. Charlie simply said, "Dive down and find them yourself. Don't come home until you do." They dove for hours until nearly sunset, and finally found the keys glinting among the weeds. Those lessons weren't taught with words, they were taught with action, creating an ethical standard that words alone could never shake. David Bostwick remembers how Charlie turned a tennis ball machine into a tool for building persistence. Although bought for the kids to practice, Charlie himself used it the most, every day hitting volleys against the net with almost superhuman intensity. But more importantly, he quietly installed in his children the habit of consistency, not through lectures, but through example. Throughout these stories, Charlie never tried to be a friend to his children in the modern sense. He was a strict, principled, but deeply fair and patient father. He never shouted, never used physical punishment. What he used was expectation, an invisible pressure far stronger than any scolding. If you live in this house, you learn to behave correctly, not because someone is watching, but because it is the right thing to do. Nothing was overly complicated, just return the car full, don't forget the newspaper, don't lose the keys. But in Charlie's world, every small action was part of a larger system of living, a web of trustworthy beliefs he built over a lifetime. One particularly memorable fishing trip with his son William. Sitting quietly on the cold lake at dawn, William realized something strange about the man beside him. Charlie never did anything halfway. He didn't just bait the hook carefully, he checked the line for wear, studied wind direction, analyzed sunlight angles. Even something as simple as fishing had to be done with meticulous integrity, never leaving the outcome to luck. William laughed later, "That was the first time I understood why he always won in investing. Because he never let life fall into the hands of chance." The children also remember his punishments by silence, no shouting, no prohibitions, just a long look, an extended quiet that was enough to make a child realize they had strayed from the standard. Charlie didn't punish behavior, he awakened self-awareness, and that was far more terrifying. Facing disappointment in the eyes of someone you respect is the harshest mirror. Wendy recalls an unforgettable lesson. As a teenager, she once reacted rudely to a waiter who was slow. She thought she was justified. Charlie said nothing at the time. The next day he brought her to his office, placed in front of her a printed article about a businessman who lost his entire company because of one rude outburst at a conference. No scolding, no lecture, just a quiet suggestion that made Wendy think for the rest of her life. Strangely, the children don't remember many times Charlie praised them, but they vividly remember every criticism, and especially the way he delivered it, never sarcastic, never belittling, but like holding up a mirror so they couldn't avoid seeing their own mistake. Charlie never tolerated carelessness in thinking, in speech, or in action. David shares, he didn't care if you were good at math or spoke Latin. He only cared that you behaved correctly, straightforward, disciplined, honest to the point that it sometimes made others uncomfortable. Growing up in such a household was not easy. But it forged people capable of standing firm in life, not because anyone forced them, but because their inner world was equipped with unbreakable principles. Yet Charlie was not a cold father. On the contrary, he was deeply affectionate, but his affection showed through actions. When one of his sons was dying of cancer, he didn't wail or cry. He simply sat by the hospital bed night after night, saying nothing, doing nothing. But that quiet presence was something his children carried with them for the rest of their lives. One of the most touching things was how he treated his wife's children from a previous marriage, children society might label not his. But in Charlie's mind, blood didn't matter. What mattered was whether you lived together correctly. He loved and raised those stepchildren to exactly the same standard: respect, fairness, unconditional responsibility. Wendy recalls family dinners where Charlie loved telling strange stories about people who failed, not to mock them, but to analyze. He never told Hollywood-style success stories. He preferred tales of people with messy thinking, foolish decisions, and self-destruction through chains of mistakes. Yet oddly, when he told them, the children didn't feel afraid, they felt guided. Behind every tragedy was a lesson about what not to do, and what to do instead. One day Wendy asked, "Dad, do you believe good people get rewarded?" Charlie frowned, then answered, "I believe in probability. And in the long run, decent people have a higher probability of happiness." That answer, like all his answers, wasn't fairy tale colored. It was colored with reality, logic, and quiet kindness. Living beside someone like Charlie Munger wasn't just being raised, it was being challenged. Every word, every action, even his silences felt like a question: are you living correctly? Wendy tells of a deep memory. As a young girl, she once showed contempt for a slow server. Charlie said quietly, almost offhand, "You don't know what that person has gone through today." Then he continued eating as if nothing happened. But that cold, sharp, yet kind sentence struck her ego like a gentle punch. She never repeated the behavior again. Another time, when a child excitedly boasted about winning a video game, Charlie smiled and asked, "Do you think those skills will help you anywhere in real life?" No intent to crush joy, just gently returning every action to the core question: is this truly useful? For Charlie, everything, from how you treat a waiter to how you spend time, should be examined under the standard of effectiveness and morality. Yet he wasn't an impossibly perfect father. In fact, Charlie had a very dark, very sharp sense of humor, and he often used it to teach without lecturing. The children remember times he pretended to be a failed CEO, staging mock shareholder meetings in the living room with a tragic voice: "I'm sorry, but I think the accounting system has betrayed me." The whole family would collapse in laughter, but behind the laughter was the message: stupidity dressed in sophisticated language is still stupidity. William recalls a small but unforgettable moment. Charlie once gave him an expensive fountain pen for his birthday. Instead of saying, "Write many good things," he said, "I'm giving you a tool that can make you a clear thinker, if you use it properly." A gift that still carried responsibility, not just privilege. That was Charlie's style. One big difference from many parents of his time: he never used fame or financial success as a yardstick. His children never heard him say, "You need to become a doctor, lawyer, or CEO." What he cared about was, can you keep an independent mind? Can you overcome your own ignorance? For Charlie, achievement was only a byproduct. The foundation was inner honesty and reliable character. A touching image the children recall: on winter evenings when everyone was exhausted, Charlie would still sit in his study under the warm desk lamp, turning pages, occasionally jotting notes. No one asked him to do it. No one praised him. But it happened every day. That quiet persistence of a man nearing 80 still reading, still learning, still looking up words, taught the children a wordless lesson about lifelong learning. Learning wasn't for exams, promotions, or beating others. Learning was a way to protect one's character, because a deeply learned person is rarely petty. That's why he encouraged them to read philosophy, math, physics, psychology, not to become walking encyclopedias, but to avoid becoming puppets of base emotions and foolish media. David recalls a family dinner where everyone argued passionately about a social issue. After 15 minutes, Charlie, who had barely spoken, slowly asked, "Has anyone here ever tried living on minimum wage for 6 months?" The table fell silent. He continued, "If not, we're just pretending to understand." He didn't dismiss the value of argument, but he always reminded them that knowledge without lived experience easily becomes arrogance. Looking back on life with Charlie, the children don't remember him as a rich father in the self-help book sense. They remember him as a solid father, unflashy and showy, but present like a moral anchor in a chaotic world. William describes early mornings. While the house slept, Charlie would rise quietly, make tea, sit and read. No one demanded it. No one applauded it. But it happened daily. That consistency, undemonstrative, unrewarded, sank deep into the children's minds as a model: live well not to be recognized, but because it is the right way to live. In the family, Charlie never played the role of domineering patriarch. He didn't need to control. He led by example, and sometimes by unexpected humor. The children remember how much he loved playing mock interviews at dinner, pretending to be a bankrupt investor, a lying politician, and letting the kids interrogate him. Through those games he taught analysis, counter-argument, and, most importantly, how to spot nonsense dressed as sense. He wove in behavioral psychology principles, what he later called the psychology of human misjudgment, but not as a professor. He played the fool so his children could learn how to avoid being one. In that way, Charlie didn't just transmit knowledge, he taught humility. Because to learn, you must first accept that you can be wrong. One thing every child raised in Charlie's house remembers for life: he never did anything halfway. If he decided to hold a family meeting, he prepared as if it were the Supreme Court. If he read a book, he read from table of contents to final footnote. If he said let Dad think about it more, it meant he was truly thinking, and would return with a thoroughly examined view. So when he praised, it carried great weight. When he criticized, you sat down and listened. There was no room for empty flattery in Charlie's world. Everything needed grounding. Every word carried responsibility. Every action shaped the person you would become. The children still remember one night in the backyard, looking up at the starry sky, no TV, just him and the kids. He said, "Every star up there is an unsolved problem. If you're patient enough, you can understand a few of them. But never forget, what matters isn't solving them all, it's never stopping asking why." Wendy calls that his intellectual legacy. Charlie didn't leave his children a specific fortune. He left them a belief system, a way of seeing the world, and a mirror they could always hold up to themselves. He treated the housekeeper the same way he spoke to CEOs: no distinction of status, no bowing to power, no contempt for those with less education. "Every person is a special case," he often said. "And if you're not curious enough to understand them, you're not wise enough to judge them." Perhaps the greatest thing Charlie passed on wasn't lessons, it was an attitude toward life: no compromise with wrongness, never stop learning, never trade dignity for short-term gain. Growing up beside Charlie Munger was a privilege, but also a difficult journey. None of them thought of themselves as children of a famous man. They saw themselves as students in a very special classroom, where the teacher never gave grades. Because the real grade was how you lived your life afterward. And perhaps when Charlie left this world, he left no lengthy will, but he left a kind of legacy very few achieve: a generation of people shaped by ethics, discipline, and clear thinking. Chapter 3. Charlie's approach to life, learning, and decision-making. One thing that strikes anyone who ever spent time with Charlie Munger is that he never separated living well from investing wisely. For Charlie, successful investing wasn't a separate skill, it was simply the natural outcome of a rationally organized life, deep thinking, and brutal self-discipline, much like his lifelong hero Benjamin Franklin. Charlie was the ultimate self-taught, self-trained, and self-respecting individual. Benjamin Franklin succeeded in nearly every domain: science, diplomacy, printing, journalism, philanthropy, invention, but what Charlie admired most wasn't the achievements themselves, but the method: a disciplined yet tolerant, practical yet profound approach. From Franklin, Charlie absorbed the ability to penetrate to the essence of things, boundless curiosity, patience with complexity, and the skill of drawing simple conclusions from a vast, multidisciplinary lattice of knowledge. What made Charlie Munger truly distinctive was that he never called himself an investor. He lived as a thinker, decided like a strategist, learned like a scholar, and conducted business like an architect of systems. This unusual combination made him a grand master of preparation, patience, discipline, and objectivity. Warren Buffett once said, "Charlie can analyze and evaluate any deal faster and more accurately than anyone I know. He can spot the real weakness in 60 seconds. So what created that almost uncanny ability? The answer lies in a foundational life philosophy. Never make important decisions based on the superficiality of single-discipline intuition. Instead, build a dense latticework of mental models drawn from many different fields: physics, biology, psychology, mathematics, history, philosophy, economics, engineering, and use them as a multi-lens filter to see through the true nature of every problem. Charlie called this the multidisciplinary mental models approach. It is the central pillar that completely differentiated him from conventional investors. Most investors look only at financial statements, ratios, quantitative analyses in isolation. They treat a business as an isolated object, a set of numbers. Charlie did the opposite. He viewed a business as a living organism embedded in a complex ecosystem of countless interactions and interdependencies. He didn't look at a company through its balance sheet alone. He observed it as an open system interacting with social, biological, psychological, historical, legal, and even cultural variables. To truly understand a company in Charlie's eyes meant answering questions like: why does it exist? What problem does it solve, and for whom? What drives people to buy its products? What makes it durable? Does its distribution model create lasting competitive advantage? Are there blind spots in its strategy? Who are the hidden competitors the market hasn't yet noticed? Which non-financial forces could change the game entirely? To answer those questions, Charlie fearlessly dug into fields far outside finance. He studied physics to understand entropy and equilibrium models. He studied behavioral psychology to understand why humans so often make irrational decisions. He read biology to grasp ecosystems and natural selection mechanisms, then applied them to industry analysis. He studied history to recognize recurring patterns, mathematics to test intuition, and ethics to set behavioral boundaries in business. That breadth wasn't dilettanteism, it was highly systematic. Each model was a piece of his cognitive map. The more pieces, the more complete the map. But crucially, one had to know when to apply which model, and never let one seemingly correct model blind the full picture. That's why he repeatedly quoted the great German mathematician Carl Jacobi: invert, always invert. This wasn't just a mathematical technique, it became a core principle of reasoning. If you can't solve a problem by moving forward, start from the opposite end result and work backward to find the causes. Charlie frequently used inversion to uncover common thinking errors others missed. While other investors asked, why will this company grow, Charlie asked, what could cause it to collapse? While others asked, how can we succeed, Charlie asked, what are the most common catastrophic failure modes, and how do we avoid them? This inverted thinking helped him sidestep countless fatal mistakes in both investing and life. Charlie once compared proper thinking to building a bridge across a chasm: make it either extremely solid or don't build it at all. Faulty thinking, to him, was not just intellectual betrayal, it was moral betrayal. Because errors in thinking lead to errors in action, and errors in action can destroy not only opportunities but sometimes entire lives. That's why he was so harsh toward intellectual laziness, what he considered the most silent and dangerous disease of modern society. He called shallow thinking surface processing, looking only at appearances, reacting without analysis, responding without reflection. To combat it, he advocated rigorous mental checklists. Whenever facing an important decision, Charlie never relied on raw intuition. He systematically ran the issue through multiple mental models. Microeconomics: are there incentive distortions? Are participants behaving optimally? Behavioral psychology: which cognitive biases are at play? Anchoring, confirmation bias, social proof. Systems theory: are there overlooked interconnections between variables? Probability and statistics: is the likelihood I assign realistic? Is the sample representative? Ethics: if I'm wrong, how much harm could it cause others? Charlie believed that simply repeating these uncomfortable questions before every major decision would make a person less stupid over time. And if you can become less stupid every year, you've already beaten 90% of the world. A key element of his thinking was systematic humility. Charlie never pretended to know everything. On the contrary, he frequently said, "I don't know," and viewed that as a mark of intellectual maturity. To him, an intelligent person isn't the one who knows the most, it's the one who best knows the limits of their own knowledge. Knowledge has boundaries, ignorance is infinite. He told Harvard students, if you can't clearly identify the edges of your own circle of competence, you're standing on quicksand thinking it's concrete. That's why he was extremely wary of overconfidence, especially in people who achieve early success. Success, he warned, is a double-edged sword. It can convince you that you're smarter than you really are, causing you to stop learning, stop doubting, stop checking your assumptions. The biggest mistake smart people make, he said, is believing they are immune to stupidity. Charlie never romanticized intelligence. To him, temperament, not IQ, was the decisive factor. An average person with enough patience, objectivity, honesty with themselves, can outperform a genius who is arrogant and emotional. His thinking wasn't built on flowery language but on pure logic, sometimes to the point of near brutality. He once dismissed a colleague's investment strategy with, "This only works if most market participants are dumber than you, and that's not a reliable way to bet on the future in a world where everyone wants to believe they're the smartest person in the room." Charlie chose to be the quiet one, checking whether the room is actually on fire. A crucial part of his method was lifelong learning, but not the superficial stay updated kind. He learned to restructure his brain. Every new subject was another tool added to his mental toolkit. He read for principles, not details, and trained himself to turn every insight into a reusable model. You don't need to know everything, he emphasized, but you need to know what's worth knowing, and how to apply it at the right moment. That's how he could draw business lessons from Pavlov's experiments, strategy from famous battles, and investing insights from evolutionary biology. If there was one intellectual enemy Charlie warned against most relentlessly, it was cognitive biases, the systematic errors in human thinking that we don't even notice. To him, these were the root of most terrible decisions in investing, business, and personal life. He didn't just know they existed, he dissected them like an anatomist. Charlie listed more than 20 common psychological misjudgments and described how they interact and amplify each other, turning people into fools who still believe they're smart. Some especially dangerous ones he always guarded against. Incentive-caused bias. When rewards distort perception, don't expect people to see things differently when their paycheck depends on not understanding what you just said. Commitment and consistency bias. Once publicly committed to a view, people defend it even against clear evidence, explaining why CEOs often prolong failing strategies rather than admit error early. Social proof. When many people believe something, we assume it must be true, regardless of reason. This drives financial bubbles and herd behavior. Loss aversion. People will do irrational things just to avoid losing what they already have, even when it no longer has real value. This traps people in holding losing positions. Authority bias. People obey apparent authority even when it contradicts ethics or reason. Charlie didn't merely know these biases, he built defensive systems against them, checking decisions through opposing models, deliberately seeking contrary viewpoints, even role-playing his own critic. For him, understanding biases wasn't just about avoiding mistakes, it was about preventing self-deception. People aren't stupid because they lack information, they're stupid because they don't want to face information that contradicts their existing beliefs. The most dangerous enemy isn't ignorance, it's ignorance plus complacency. That's why he placed such strong emphasis on ethics in thinking. Never use your intelligence to rationalize wrong behavior. If you weaponize reasoning to defend the indefensible, you're using your greatest tool for destruction against yourself and others. In investing, Charlie was especially vigilant about things that seem right. He believed the greatest dangers don't come from obvious falsehoods, but from half-truths, companies with steady profits but hidden risky debt structures, CEOs who talk correctly but act oppositely, markets that grow but lack sustainability. All are rational-looking traps. When something looks too perfect, he warned, dig deeper, because usually something stinks underneath. His critical thinking was pushed to the limit, not out of stubbornness, but to preserve intellectual capital. Another cornerstone of Munger's method was margin of safety thinking. Life is too complex to be right 100% of the time, so instead of betting big on being correct, always prepare for being wrong. This wasn't just an investing rule, it was a life principle. He avoided situations that only succeed if everything goes perfectly, because in reality, almost nothing does. If you need a perfect chain of events to win, you're playing a dangerous game, he cautioned. So Charlie always preferred simple but robust solutions over optimal but fragile ones. He liked businesses that would still run well even if the CEO fell asleep, strategies that preserved capital even in bad markets, relationships that survived arguments with mutual respect intact. When asked the secret to success, Charlie usually avoided glamorous answers. He didn't talk about once-in-a-lifetime opportunities, breakthrough strategies, or, above all, passion. Instead, he quietly repeated a philosophy soaked into his bones across a lifetime. Live decently. Learn all your life. Avoid being stupid. It sounds simple, even banal. But that deliberate simplicity was a brilliant counterpunch to an era obsessed with flashy brilliance. In a world where everyone wants to shine, Charlie chose to be the person who is wrong less often each day. And to achieve that, he pursued an almost ascetic discipline, minimalism in action, complexity in thought. Don't decide until you truly understand the essence. Don't participate if the rules aren't clear. Don't speak unless truly necessary. Never work with untrustworthy people no matter how attractive the profit. Another deep principle, truly successful people are those others want to work with, even when not forced to. This is a profound ethical rule Charlie guarded fiercely: build a life where smart, honest, decent people want to be near you. If you can only work with terrible people, perhaps you are part of the terribleness. Charlie never used goal lists like have X amount of money, Y properties, Z stocks. His checklist was different. Did I learn something new today? Did I admit when I was wrong? Did I keep my promises? Did I do the right thing when no one was watching? Am I confident without being arrogant? Will the people I respect still want to be my friend at the end of my life? For Charlie, you don't need to be a genius to succeed, but you must avoid the things that guarantee failure: excessive greed, dishonesty, intellectual laziness, choosing the wrong associates. Avoid just those four, and you've already outperformed 90% of humanity. A profound part of this chapter is how Charlie viewed time. He didn't believe in busyness. He made time for reading, thinking, and doing nothing. Sometimes the best way to make the right decision is to do nothing at all. Let the muddy water settle so you can see the bottom clearly. In a world obsessed with speed, he chose depth. In a society demanding instant reaction, he chose silence for observation. Charlie also spoke openly about death. To him, it was a natural consequence, nothing to fear, only something to prepare for. Preparation wasn't about writing a will for assets, it was about daily behavior. Every moral choice, every correct decision, every honest action was a brick in the monument of character you leave behind. When I die, he once said, I don't care what they write on my tombstone. I only care whether people still talk about the things I believed in, and live by them. This chapter closes with a memorable call, not for the faint-hearted. If you truly want to become better than most, ignore most of the advice out there. Don't chase passion, don't idolize wealth, don't confuse short-term success with long-term wisdom. Live systematically. Learn every day. Dare to stand alone when necessary. And above all, never deceive yourself, because you are the easiest person to fool. That is Charlie Munger's philosophy. Not loud, not colorful, but deep enough to sustain an entire life. Chapter 4. 11 Commencement Speeches. One sweltering afternoon at a prestigious high school in Los Angeles, on a wooden stage amid polite applause and clicking cameras, an elderly man in a gray suit stepped forward. He wasn't a famous orator. He even declared, "This is the only commencement speech I will ever give in my life." But with that single appearance, Charlie Munger scattered a way of thinking that upended every conventional notion young people hold about success. He opened with a light joke that completely inverted expectations. Instead of telling the graduates how to build a happy life, he chose to show them the surest path to misery. This inverse thinking, invert, always invert, became an enlightening lesson. Sometimes the fastest way to understand what is right is to study what is wrong. Want to be miserable? It's easy, he said with a faint smile. Be envious. Blame others. Live without discipline. He painted a portrait of failure, not through dramatic tragedy, but through everyday habits we think are harmless, envying others, impatience, indifference to kindness, always finding excuses to blame circumstances. Each of those habits accumulates bit by bit, forming a slow but certain road to hell. Charlie didn't stop there. He highlighted a more subtle form of misery, chronic dishonesty with oneself. A person who always rationalizes weakness, who denies their mistakes, gradually loses the ability to perceive reality. And once that ability is gone, you are no longer free, you become a slave to the illusions you yourself created. His tone was gentle, almost casual. His words cut like a cold blade. He recounted his time at the military academy Moronos, which taught millions of young men what Harvard sometimes fails to teach: be on time, do the job right, and do it every day. A simple lesson in discipline, delivered with unmistakable seriousness. If only universities could teach that too, he remarked. He closed that section with a strange wish: I hope you will rise by living a humble life, bowing lower each day. A blessing that ran completely counter to every flashy commencement slogan. But that was pure Charlie Munger, flipping everything upside down and forcing deeper thought. He didn't offer advice on climbing to the top in the motivational speaker style. Instead, he urged the young to clearly see the abyss. Knowing what to avoid is often more important than knowing the right path. He borrowed a darkly humorous image: if you want an unhappy life, make sure no one can stand to be around you. Then he listed, not lofty vices, but ordinary, easy to fall into flaws. Constant envy of other people's success. It wastes time and poisons the mind. Envy is the stupidest sin, he said, because it gives you no advantage whatsoever, while the envied person remains unharmed. Never taking responsibility, always blaming others, the system, the times. Reacting instead of thinking. Most failures don't come from lack of ability but from living in perpetual reflex mode, taking everything personally, exploding at every provocation, turning oneself into a slave of emotion rather than master of reason. Another piercing insight: he separated material success from moral success. He didn't urge chasing career glory, he asked directly, are the people you admire most necessarily the ones who make the most money? There are values that, if not claimed early, you will spend the rest of your life trying to regain. One of them is being trustworthy. Becoming someone others want to work with, even when not compelled, is, according to Charlie, one of the most valuable assets you can accumulate. But to earn that, you must be willing to say, I was wrong when necessary. You must be humble enough to listen. Patient when others don't yet understand you. Think slowly, speak little, do right even when no one applauds. Then Charlie shared a simple but long-lasting life rule: go to bed every night without owing anyone an apology. If you can do that, he said, you have not wasted the day. One of the deepest parts of the speech came when he told the story of an old classmate who died, not from accident or disease, but because his mind slowly rotted in bitterness and blame. That classmate had once been a brilliant student, full of promise. But over the years, resentment, envy, and the belief that life is unfair eroded every good quality he once had. He didn't fail because he lacked intelligence, Charlie said. He failed because he couldn't control his bitterness. That was a special kind of bankruptcy of spirit, a quiet, steady slide that begins with refusing to forgive and ends with the complete loss of hope. Here Charlie subtly shifted from pure logic to emotional philosophy, a Charlie Munger both razor-sharp and deeply humane. He didn't preach morality in the you should style, he showed the real biological and psychological consequences of harmful patterns. Envy keeps you in constant stress. Blame steals control of your life. Quick temper shortens lifespan. He used logic to dismantle the illusion, I have the right to act this way. If you go to a restaurant and meet one rude waiter, that's not a big deal. But if you treat 20 waiters badly over 20 years, no one will ever smile at you with genuine warmth again. The issue isn't one incident, it's the accumulation of bad habits that creates a bad life. Charlie called this slow self-destruction. No explosion, no scandal. Just a little less learning each day, a little lying, ignoring what's right, resenting others, half-hearted work. Then one day you wake up and realize you no longer respect yourself. Your greatest enemy in life isn't other people, it's the worst version of yourself. And you will live with that version every day. If you don't learn to control and rise above yourself, no one, not even Harvard, can help you. Charlie also offered a sharp paradox. Many brilliant people become failures precisely because they use their intelligence to rationalize instead of to learn. When a smart person makes a mistake, they don't apologize, they argue. They build verbal fortresses to defend themselves, inadvertently blocking their own growth. Near the end, Charlie didn't talk about dazzling successes or tell the graduates what to do next. He simply spoke about the people he admired, not for wealth or fame, but because they lived in ways that earned genuine respect and affection. Become lovable, he said. It's a rational life strategy, not just because it's moral, but because it works. You receive more help, more forgiveness, more real connection, more opportunities, not through flattery, but because people feel safe trusting you. He stressed that most happiness in life doesn't come from grand things, it comes from how the people around you feel about you. True admiration, the kind money can't buy, tone can't fake, and fame can't manufacture, is reserved for those who live decently, think maturely, and act consistently. In his farewell, Charlie left a simple sentence that many students later said changed the direction of their lives. If I could choose between genius-level intelligence that no one wants to be near, and ordinary intelligence paired with always living honorably, I would choose the second. And I would bet that the second person ends up happier, longer lasting, and with far fewer regrets. That wasn't just advice, it was a message from a lifetime. A man who had seen both the light and shadow of human nature, markets, and his own soul. Charlie didn't stand above them preaching. He sat at eye level, like an old man telling stories to the young, with a gaze both cold and gentle. And then he finished. No thunderous applause, no grand declarations, just a long, thoughtful silence. The silence of people quietly reconsidering how they had been living. In that moment, those students probably felt something rare, a real lesson from someone who had spent an entire life learning so he could finally say what is true. Thank you for staying until the very end. It's not easy to enter the world of Charlie Munger, a world without color, without comfort, without indulgence of ambiguity. There, every ignorance is named, every illusion stripped of its smooth shell, every success examined under the light of discipline, ruthless integrity, and one old-fashioned weapon few still use, deep thinking. If you've listened this far, I believe you're not looking for entertainment, nor for instant success formulas. You're looking for a thinking companion, a quiet teacher, and you've found Charlie Munger. Not because he offers easy answers, but because he isn't afraid to ask questions that keep you awake at night. This book doesn't teach you how to become special. It patiently points out the paths that reliably lead to failure, so you can avoid them. No magic spell, no formula, just close observation of life and a profound commitment to integrity. If, after hearing this summary, you feel a certain inner turbulence, an unease from unanswered questions, a sense that you need to rethink how you're living, then perhaps that is exactly what Munger always hoped to leave behind. Not applause, but a seed of awareness beginning to sprout in your inner world. I don't hope you become successful after this book. I only hope you live more awake and brave enough to recognize when you're deceiving yourself. If you find value in this summary, please leave an honest, thoughtful review, not flattery, but real reflection, the way Charlie would have done it. Not for me, but for yourself, to record your thoughts and begin building a clearer standard of thinking for your own life. And if there's another book you believe deserves to be retold in this way, please suggest it. Just send the title, not because it's famous, but because you think it's worth digging deep into. I'll read it, listen to it, and, if possible, retell it with all the respect it deserves. Thank you sincerely for daring to travel this far with me, through every word, every thought, and even the dark corners where the light of thinking rarely reaches. Keep reading. Keep thinking. Keep living by a higher standard, even when no one demands it of you.